Hey guys! Tonight we're doing something very ambitious. We're going to talk, very slowly, about farming. So dim the lights, lower your phone brightness, let your brain unclench a little. You don't need to remember anything. You don't need to learn anything. You're just here to drift gently through time, like a mildly curious ghost hovering over a field of extremely unimpressive wheat. Tonight, we begin a very slow history of ancient farming, which is really the story of when humans collectively decided, okay, this wandering thing is exhausting. What if, and hear me out, we stayed put and stared at dirt instead? And yes, this decision will eventually lead to taxes, kings, wars, and your email inbox. But for now, it's just people, mud, and a lot of waiting. So let's ease into it. For most of human existence, farming did not exist at all. No fields, no barns, no back pain caused by repetitive bending motions. Instead, humans were hunter-gatherers, which sounds very rugged and romantic, but in practice it meant walking constantly, eating whatever you could find, and hoping tonight's dinner didn't run faster than you. Life was mobile, temporary. You followed the seasons, you followed animals, you followed berries until the berries stopped cooperating. And honestly, it worked pretty well. Hunter-gatherers were often healthier than early farmers. They ate varied diets, they worked fewer hours, their teeth were better, their spines were less tragic. But there was one tiny problem. You couldn't really settle down. You couldn't build big houses, you couldn't hoard stuff, you couldn't create elaborate social hierarchies where one guy gets everything and everyone else gets blisters. And eventually, someone looked at a patch of wild grass and thought, what if we just stayed here and waited? This was not a sudden revelation. No one woke up one morning and said, today I invent agriculture. It was more like a slow, accidental relationship with plants that got way too serious. At some point, humans noticed patterns. Seeds fell, plants grew back, certain areas produced food more reliably, and humans, being humans, thought, well, what if we helped a little? So they cleared some space. They scattered seeds on purpose. They protected plants from animals. They waited. A lot. This begins around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, depending on where you're standing and who you're asking. The Ice Age was winding down, the climate was becoming warmer and more stable, which is really all farming needs to get started. Stable weather, predictable seasons, and people willing to commit to the long-term emotional labor of plants. The first farming didn't happen in just one place. Humans independently figured this out in multiple regions, because boredom and hunger are very persuasive teachers. In the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, Syria, parts of Turkey, people began domesticating wheat and barley. In China, rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, maize. In the Andes, potatoes, because of course the Andes would give us potatoes. And these early farmers were not confident about any of this. They were experimenting, they were guessing, they were probably wrong a lot. Imagine planting seeds and then waiting months, hoping you didn't just bury your food for no reason. This is faith-based living. Early farming villages were small, very small. Clusters of simple homes made from mud brick, wood, or whatever was nearby and not actively trying to kill you. People stayed close to their fields, which meant they stayed close to each other, which meant friction. Suddenly, you couldn't just walk away from someone you disliked. You had crops to tend, you had land invested. So social structures started forming. Rules, traditions, unspoken agreements about who owns what patch of dirt. And slowly, very slowly, hierarchy crept in. Someone controlled more land, someone stored more grain, someone decided they were in charge. Because of course they did. Farming also meant animals got involved, not as food at first, but as roommates. Goats, sheep, cattle, pigs. Animals that were previously wild were now tolerated, then controlled, then selectively bred. This is when humans started making animals worse at surviving independently, but very good at being edible or useful. Chickens, for example, were not originally impressive. Small, nervous, uncertain about everything. But humans saw potential, mostly in eggs. Domestication was not kind, but it was efficient. With farming came food surplus, which sounds great, and it is, sometimes. But surplus creates problems. You need storage, you need protection, you need people whose job is not farming. So now you have specialists, toolmakers, potters, eventually priests. Because once you depend entirely on crops, you get very anxious about weather, and anxiety loves ritual. People began tracking seasons, observing the sun, making calendars, not because they were spiritual visionaries, but because they really, really wanted the wheat to grow. Early farming was brutal on the human body. Repetitive labor, grinding grain, hauling water, clearing land with very unimpressive tools. Skeletons from early farming communities show shorter stature, weaker bones, and signs of malnutrition. This was not an upgrade, but farming allowed more people to exist, even if those people were slightly miserable. Population increased, villages became towns, towns became cities. And cities, well, cities is where things start to get complicated. But we're not rushing there. We're staying slow. Very slow. Let's linger in these early fields. Imagine a Neolithic farmer waking up before sunrise. No alarm clock, just habit and mild dread. They step outside, the air is cool, the fields are quiet. They check the crops, they check for pests, they check for signs that something has gone wrong.
Because if something has gone wrong, there is no backup plan. No grocery store, no imports, no maybe next month. Farming ties survival to patience, to planning, to delayed gratification, which is why farming communities valued routine, tradition, doing things the way they've always been done. Change was risky. Experimentation could mean starvation. So farming made humans cautious, conservative, attached to the past, and also territorial. Land mattered now, borders mattered, ownership mattered, and eventually conflict followed. But again, not yet. For now, it's just people and plants learning to tolerate each other. Tools improved slowly. Stone sickles, grinding stones, simple plows pulled by animals. Nothing dramatic, just incremental improvement over thousands of years. Children grew up learning farming tasks, not because they loved it, but because everyone else was doing it and leaving wasn't really an option anymore. Diet became less varied, more grain-heavy, more predictable, more boring, which is probably why humans started fermenting things, because if you're going to eat the same food forever, you might as well get a little tipsy. Farming also reshaped time itself. Life was no longer about now, it was about later. Later in the season, later in the year, next harvest, next cycle. This long-term thinking would eventually allow writing, science, and history, but it started with seeds and patience, and mistakes. So many mistakes. Crops failed, floods happened, droughts arrived uninvited, and people blamed gods, spirits, ancestors, because blaming the weather didn't feel productive. Over time, farming knowledge accumulated, passed down, refined. What to plant, when to plant, where not to plant, ever, no matter how tempting it looks. This was slow knowledge, hard-earned, unwritten at first, and deeply personal. Your family's survival depended on remembering what worked. So here we are, at the very beginning of agriculture. No empires, no kings, no dramatic speeches. Just dirt, seeds, and humans quietly committing to the longest group project in history. In the next part, we'll gently drift forward, toward bigger villages, stranger social rules, and the subtle realization that farming didn't just change how humans ate, it changed how humans thought. But for now, let's stay here, in the fields, listening to the wind, waiting for the plants to grow. No rush.